Two brothers who took part in a frenzied attack on a woman neighbour they had argued with were jailed for a total of 34 years for her murder. Nicholas and Stuart Curtis both got involved in the brutal and ultimately fatal assault against Glenda Jackson after she had allegedly damaged a van which belonged to one of them. Liverpool Crown Court heard how Nicholas, 32, used a knife to repeatedly stab the 44-year-old, while his brother Stuart, 31, delivered a series of savage kicks and stamps to her head. As the minimum terms of 18 years for Nicholas and 16 years for dad of one Stuart were relayed to the packed courtroom, supporters of Mrs. Jackson were heard to whisper, yes, both were handed life sentences for their part in the murderous assault. On September 30, 2018, both Mrs. Jackson and the two defendants had been out separately socialising in Birkenhead town centre when their paths crossed. Close to Grayson Mews, in John Street, the victim called police, reporting having been punched and kicked, but was also heard telling the 999 call handler that she was going to stab them. Officers attended at 2 a.m. and found Miss Jackson with injuries to her face, saying she had been attacked by the occupants of flat 20 in Grayson Mews, where the defendants had been sleeping. But she appeared reluctant to give a statement and police left. Some time later, Mrs. Jackson decided to arm herself with a knife and hammer and began damaging a white Mercedes Sprinter van parked outside, which belonged to Nicholas Curtis. Alerted by loud bangs, Curtis bolted out of flat 20 barefoot, wearing his boxer shorts and a jumper, and went to investigate what he thought was his van being broken into. At some point in the next few seconds, there was an altercation between Curtis and Mrs. Jackson, which left her dying in the communal hallway. At 3:21 a.m, staff at Arrow Park Hospital called the police to report that Nicholas Curtis had attended A and E with 2 stab wounds, accompanied by his brother Stuart. Mrs. Jackson's body was found in the hallway at 7:55 a.m. by a neighbour, around 4 hours after she was fatally wounded and less than 6 after she reported being assaulted by a group linked to the Curtis brothers. Judge Aubrey TC told the brothers, "I am satisfied both of you initiated violence on that night and as the chain of events unfolded. Only the two of you know what happened in that communal hallway. The victim sustained 5 stab wounds, one which had gone through her thigh, which was 15 cm in depth, and which had cut one of her vital arteries. Another knife wound was to the right side of her chest, while one was discovered above her eyelid. Mrs. Jackson also had other injuries to her face and head, which were consistent with a person wearing a particular type of footwear." Judge Aubrey continued, "The deceased were subjected to a sustained assault by each of you. Both of you were acting together. Nicholas Curtis, you had stabbed her 5 times. Stuart Curtis, you kicked and stamped on her repeatedly. Both of you left Glenda Jackson to die. When both of you left, you took with you the murder weapon and placed it in a wash basin of your flat. This was a ferocious and sustained attack committed by both of you in retaliation. You were both determined to teach her a lesson and did so with fateful consequences. This was a group attack, a joint and frenzied attack perpetrated by both of you. Is Stuart Curtis using your feet to kick and stamp in full knowledge of your brother? Both of you had earlier assaulted her, which was the catalyst to do what she did. Nicholas Curtis, you intended to kill Glenda Jackson that night, but not in the case of you, Stuart Curtis. You knew your brother was in possession of the knife." The brothers had claimed they were acting in self-defense, but Judge Aubrey added, "Any acts of defense almost instantaneously became acts of aggression from both of you. I am satisfied the violence that night was initiated by you." Judge Aubrey said he was not satisfied the murder was aggravated by any sexual orientation, relating to claims heard earlier in the trial that Mrs. Jackson had been subjected with verbal homophobic abuse.